Great. So, hi everyone. Nice to see kind of a few familiar faces returning again today. Oh, I am the host now. Very good. Right. We're delighted today to welcome Özge Yaka from Potsdam University with us to give a talk today on hydropower and resistance in Turkey. Özge is currently at Potsdam University, but I believe you actually received your PhD from a department that I worked in a couple of years ago, which is the sociology department in Manchester. So point of connection there. So Özge's kind of research focuses predominantly on the intersections between kind of critical social theory, theories of justice. I'm going to read out a big list here. The theories of social justice, social environmental movements, global and environmental justice, feminist theory, gender, body, and subjectivity. So some really kind of useful insights here into this webinar theme on energy, gender, and space. Highlighted kind of articles. She's got a still recent article in Antipode on rethinking justice, struggles for environmental commons, and the notion of social ecological justice, and an article in Gender, Place and Culture on feminist phenomenology of women's activism against hydropower plants in Turkey's eastern Black Sea region. And I'm guessing that might be the basis for some of the talk today. So, as always, the kind of the setup for today is that Özge will give us a talk for 30 minutes to 45 minutes, somewhere around there, and then we'll have time for some questions afterwards. Please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat during Özge's talk. I will then field them at the end, and hopefully we'll get to have a nice chat there. So without much further ado, I'll hand over to you, Özge. Thank you once again for joining us. Really looking forward to this. And yeah, should be great.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thanks for also inviting me. We'll share this now. You can see it now, no?
We can. That's perfect.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, today I will talk about a little bit about this phenomenological body-centered perspective on gender and environment, especially women's environmental activism, resistance against hydroelectric power plants. I will give some context also about this hydropower boom in Turkey, because we are here in a webinar of energy geographies. And then I will go on to talk about the resistance, women's resistance against them. So I will start by quoting two women. These are like from my own interviews. The first one is Shirin, a middle-aged woman from the village of Arılı in the province of Rize in the East Black Sea region of Turkey. So I quote, "We as women won't allow them to construct a hydropower plant here. We don't even count on men. Bring them on if they dare. If any brave fellow could come here, let them try. We will cut them into pieces. We know how to use a gun as well. We take the risk. They really shouldn't force us. Don't make people go mad." Another quotation from Bedriye, another middle-aged woman from the neighboring village of Gürsu. I quote, "We won't give up on our river. We won't. There will be blood. I will sacrifice my life if it comes to that. If I jump in front of a construction machine here and die here, these villagers will not sit hands tied. To that, my girl, we fight to that." So Shirin and Bedriye are two of the countless women who oppose the private small-scale run-of-the-river hydroelectric power plants in Turkey's East Black Sea region. As you might already know, Turkey has a relatively long history of constructing dams, especially in the context of Southeast Anatolia project, which involved multiple dams in the Euphrates and Tigris River basins. But this new wave of hydropower development is characterized by private small-scale run-of-the-river hydroelectric power plants, except a few very controversial mega dams like Ilısu. You might have heard that as well. And maybe some of you know that the run-of-the-river hydroelectric power plants require little or no water storage. They use the natural downward flow of steep rivers to capture the kinetic energy carried by water, like you see in this graph. That is why it is seen as eco-friendly alternative to hydro dams. When they are constructed extensively without effective regulation and impact assessment though, like in Turkey, their socio-ecological consequences could be devastating. Construction of private small-scale hydroelectric power plants became possible in Turkey only in 2000s after the establishment of an open energy market as a condition set by the IMF and the World Bank to release credit after the economic crisis of 1998-99. And Justice and Development Party government, which came to power in 2002, so nearly 20 years ago now, took up small-scale hydropower as a central element of its construction and energy-based growth strategy, so-called bulldozer neoliberalism. Consequently, hydropower licenses and constructions boomed in the ensuing years as private construction and energy companies were given, I quote from a newspaper article published in The Guardian in 2011, extraordinary latitude to evict villagers, expropriate land, clear state forests, and steamroller normal planning restrictions to meet the target of 4,000 hydroelectric schemes by 2023. This extensive hydro development boom targets more or less every single stream of the country at the expense of destroying countless river ecosystems, you see here. And it's gone so far that anti-hydropower activists have started to use the term the genocide of rivers to capture the extent to which the country's river ecosystems, natural habitats, fish and wildlife passages, biodiversity, and forestry have been disturbed. Sorry, I forgot to say that I'm a bit ill today, so I have sore throat and cough, so I'm drinking my tea at the same time. Sorry about that. So it's not only the river ecosystems and natural habitats that are disturbed though. Riverside communities are also affected as they virtually lose their rivers when they are diverted from their stream beds for a number of kilometers, as you see here. So as you see, the river or the stream that has always been there just disappears one day. So environmental dispossession par excellence, we can say. Not surprisingly, a large and heterogeneous movement appeared in the villages and valleys of the country, which slowly led to regional and national networks. Small-scale hydropower projects are concentrated in the Mediterranean, East and Southeast Anatolia, so mainly the Turkish Kurdistan or Kurdish parts of the country, and East Black Sea regions, where the rivers have naturally steep slopes. I've conducted extensive ethnographical research on the anti-hydropower movement between 2013 and 2016 in those three regions where the hydropower plants are concentrated. My research involves ethnographic interviews and recorded conversations with more than 100 villagers and semi-structured and in-depth interviews with the movement activists in the region's bigger towns and cities. Participatory observation, field notes, and content analysis of visual and written material produced by the movements and media and social media coverage were also important aspects of my research methodology. So the anti-hydropower movement is not exactly a women's movement. Still, one cannot help but notice, like in the quotations in the beginning, women's visibility, resilience, and courage at the grassroots level. It is the women who talk about risking their lives, even killing for the cause, while most men try to adopt a more watchful language. Hundreds of pictures and videos of women demonstrating in their traditional clothes of shalwars, long skirts, headscarves carrying banners in protest, shouting slogans, blocking construction machines, physically confronting with the military and the police have been widely shared through the news reports and social media, creating substantial public impact. So I will show you a few pictures to get some idea about women's visibility in the protests. So here you see this physical confrontation also. Yeah. So the narratives and discourses of women who oppose hydroelectric power plants differ considerably from those employed by men. Men often frame their opposition to hydropower plants with theories on global warming, global struggles on fresh water, imperialist plans of the US or Israel to grab our waters, the close affinity between the independence war and the anti-hydropower movement, like this kind of discourses. So it is what I call a micro-political frame that eclectically mixes scientific discourse with conspiracy theories and sometimes anti-Semitism, leftist and anti-imperialist arguments with nationalist slogans. Women, on the other hand, talk about mostly their bodily and sensory relationships with river waters. They speak of growing up by the river, waking up to the side of the river every day, and sleeping with the sound of the river every night. They talk about the sensations and bodily effects. They talk about the memories of their parents by the river and the sight of their children and grandchildren playing in the same waters they once played in. Those narratives reveal the interconnectedness of female bodies with river waters as the primary source of women's radical opposition against hydropower. Wherever women effectively mobilize themselves against hydropower projects and gain public visibility, the movement manages to cultivate strong public support and stop those projects in different geographical regions of the country. It was a novelty to see rural peasant women who are conventionally portrayed as hardworking but docile, confined to the private sphere of their homes, dominating the public image of a protest movement. It was the first time in Turkish history that peasant women entered the political scene of activism and protest on such impressive scale. It is not, of course, unique to Turkey. Women have assumed a leading role in the struggles for environmental commons and environmental justice across the globe, from the Greenbelt movement to Chipko Andolan, from Love Canal to War in Country to Standing Rock. Women's leading role in the struggles and their radical, committed, and courageous activism is often attributed to their gendered roles as bearers of the family, community, and culture, mainly as an extension of their role as mothers, especially in the US. In the global South, on the other hand, gendered division of labor that makes women typically responsible for sustaining livelihoods appears as an essential explanation. Let's take Bina Agarwal's seminal essay titled The Gender and Environment Debate, Lessons from India as an example. She maintains a strong association between gendered responsibility for providing a family's subsistence needs and gendered responses to threats against the resources that fulfill those needs. The argument is that because women are responsible for sustaining livelihoods, they are more susceptible and reactive to enclosures of environmental commons, which are framed in the literature as natural resources, on which the livelihoods women are trying to sustain directly depend. The natural resources livelihoods argument that dominates the fields of feminist environmentalism and feminist political ecology has strong merits in terms of going beyond ecofeminism, certain variants of which implied an essential, elemental, or biological affinity between woman and nature. Instead, this approach emphasizes social relations, material and spatial practices, and gender division of labor. Fair enough, but I want to ask here, can we go beyond this resources livelihoods argument while still building on this emphasis on social relations, spatial practices, and gender division of labor? I'm asking this question because the anti-hydropower movement in Turkey, especially in the East Black Sea region, negates the central argument of feminist environmentalism and feminist political ecology, as the livelihoods do not depend on rivers in the region. River waters are neither used for agriculture nor in the household, as the monocultural tea and to a lesser extent hazelnut agriculture is sufficiently sustained by the rainfall. East Black Sea region doesn't fit another important frame employed to understand and analyze the grassroots environmental struggles, particularly in the rural areas populated by indigenous and minority peoples. Especially in the literatures of indigenous studies, environmental anthropology, and environmental humanities in general, wherever water or river is seen more than as a resource, its cultural value is either associated with a specific religious or spiritual cosmology or connected to a broader struggle for autonomy, sovereignty, and recognition. In the East Black Sea case, though, water is neither associated with secrecy, cosmology, and belief, nor connected to a broader struggle for autonomy and recognition. So I focused my analysis on the East Black Sea region as it is the cradle of the struggle. So it is the most well-known case of this hydropower struggles in Turkey, and because it is atypical in several ways. Not only could the movements in the region be understood with the frame of a resource rebellion, in the sense of rural communities struggling to protect immediate livelihoods, as in the Mediterranean region, for example, nor was it motivated by claims of recognition as in the Kurdish parts of the country. So I thought an analysis that focuses on the case of East Black Sea might contribute to the literature by revealing something about the relationship between human communities and non-human environmental entities that goes beyond the existing economic and cultural frames. The critical question here is why people, especially women, are so motivated to protect those waters which they do not use for immediate economic purposes and which do not hold a cosmological belief-related significance. My claim is that phenomenological tradition provides conceptual tools that could help us to develop a sufficient response to this question. Two of the central concepts of phenomenological geography, this is the East Black Sea region of Turkey though. Two of the central concepts of phenomenological geography are dwelling and life world. Dwelling, which is relatively well known and well used in contemporary geography literature, has its conceptual roots in the works of Martin Heidegger, another popular figure in Germany and for good reasons. The concept refers to processes of placemaking, human practices of building, cultivating, and creating a place in which to live. The habitual patterns and micro-practices of routine labor interlock the self immediately to places and environments. This is precisely the argument of feminist environmentalism and feminist political ecology. Women who live in natural environments, mostly in rural areas, are tied to nature, so to lands and mountains, valleys and forests, lakes and rivers, through their habitual patterns of mostly unpaid work, which is the central aspect of dwelling. In that sense, dwelling is surely central to people's, particularly women's relationship with nature, also in the East Black Sea region, as women work in the tea and hazelnut fields within the dramatic landscape of the East Black Sea villages. So, as in other parts of the world, dwelling practices intimately interlock women to their immediate environments. There's another crucial concept that this tradition provides us with, though, which is life world. The concept of life world, which originated in Husserl's work, but is employed by many others, including Jürgen Habermas, denotes the routinely given and familiar world of everyday experience. Thinking these two central concepts together, we could state that structures of dwelling, such as the gendered division of labor, that requires women to work in the fields, enable everyday experiences and shape our experiential world, which is the life world. But these experiences are not limited to or dominated by the instrumentality of the work world. In other words, dwelling might be the context of the life world, but not necessarily the content. We connect with our immediate environments in many sensory, affective, and emotional ways through our routine habitual practices, through our ways of living and dwelling. Those sensory, affective, and emotional connections, however, go beyond the realm of necessity. And it is through these sensory affective connections, environmental entities such as rivers become a part of our life world. And as in the case of the East Black Sea, rivers are valuable and worth protecting, even when they are not instrumentally useful or religiously or spiritually sacred, precisely because they are part of the life world. Combining dwelling and life world requires considering experience, the experience of our environments, that is, in a broader sense, produced both through material practices of dwelling and within everyday interactions with our life world. When we talk about experience, we necessarily imply bodies and embodiment, since we live in this world as bodies and experience the world through our corporeal connection with it. Even though it is pretty obvious that we experience and relate to our environments through our bodies, a body-centered approach to gender and environment is largely absent to the broader discussion. Let me explain this point through the relationship between dwelling and life worlds, drawing on the empirical context of the East Black Sea region. In the region, tea and to a lesser extent hazelnut agriculture provides the context for the routine habitual interactions between human dwellers and river waters. It is mainly women who work in the fields in the region, which means being in everyday sensory contact with river waters. The villages and fields are located by the rivers and streams along the densely forested valleys that run through the Pontic Mountains towards the Black Sea. Hence, not only agricultural work, but all practices of working, living, dwelling enable and maintain human-non-human interaction in the region due to its particular geography and landscape. But the centrality of tea and hazelnut farming to the region's economic geography and general practicing of dwelling delineates the particularly intimate bodily relation between women and river waters. In other words, everyday practices of women working in the fields mainly, but also cutting and carrying the firewood, breeding livestock, etc., endangers a continuous corporeal connection with river waters. Bodily senses and affects act as the media of this corporeal connection. Ayşe Cengiz, a middle-aged woman from Fındıklı in Rize province, illustrates it perfectly when she says, I quote, "The river flows just in front of my house. Whenever we swelter, working in the tea fields or at home, we go in the river to cool off." It is necessary to stress here that the rivers are small by size and volume in the region. They are mostly streams with naturally steep river beds. So you can see it here, the pictures I take. Their waters are cool, clean, clear, and transparent. They also form small natural pools alongside the current, which serve as small swimming and playing pools for children and adults. Going into the cool waters of the river in the summer, especially after working in the fields, seems to be central to the body regulation regime for women and for relaxation and revitalization. This relaxing, cooling, and reviving encounters with river waters could thus be seen as a particular effective moment within the broader processes of social reproduction. It does not mean that this sensory affective relationship between women's bodies and river waters is purely functional, though. Gülseren from the village of Aslandere in Rize province, who was approaching her 70s when I talked to her in the summer of 2013, described herself as a frog to express her love of swimming in the river. I quote, "We do not have beaches or swimsuits. We swim here in our clothes. We have such beautiful, clean river that you can drink from it while swimming. We cannot live without the river. I cannot live without the river." River waters, seeing, hearing, touching, drinking the water, animates, makes happy, generates joy. Seniye, a young female activist of the anti-hydropower movement from the village of Aslandere, explains, "Yesterday, I was working in our hazelnut field close to the river. As I was tired, I went to the river, put my hazelnuts there, and slept with the sound of the river for about half an hour. I woke up so fresh and energetic, and I started to work again. River is life and soul, the can and hayat in Turkish. If I would not hear the sound of the river, I would probably feel completely empty. The last sentence of her statement captures the process of transition in which affect breeds meaning and identity. This relationship between bodily affects and identity is established on a daily basis through the routine everyday interactions with river waters, but it also involves the vast repository of corporeal encounters that took place in the past. Narratives of East Black Sea villagers, especially women, speak for the centrality of embodied memories for personal history, family heritage, and identity. Senses are powerful sources of body memory due to body's capacity to carry memories of senses somatically. A famous example of this phenomenon is the Madeleine episode in Proust's In Search of Lost Time. This episode, as well known, illustrates how the taste of a piece of tea-soaked cake brings complex memories back. It demonstrates that bodily senses, as well as certain places, situations, and bodily encounters, function as memory cores, as Thomas Fuchs calls it, a German phenomenologist, which can recall and release enclosed memories under suitable circumstances. So let me give an example. Shirin, a middle-aged woman from the village of Gürsu, told me in her terrace that she was ready to die to protect the river and pointed an area some 100 meters ahead along the riverbed, so we can see the river from the terrace. Look, there's a waterfall over there. We used to take a break there with my parents on our way to the plateau. So villagers go to these plateaus that we call yayla in Turkish in the summer by walking mainly. We used to eat and sleep always by the river during our journey. So this is how the bodily senses and everyday sensory interaction with river waters function as memory cores. Every time Shirin sees that waterfall, every time she walks the same path with the sound of the river in the background, every time she sits on the terrace, as we did on that summer day, the memories of her childhood, her parents, and the intimacy she shared with them are released. Another example is given by Ayten Aydın from Arhavi in Artvin province, who also talks about her childhood memories when asked about her opposition to hydropower plants. Her memories are also multisensory body memories of river waters. I quote, "Our mothers worked in the fields. We, the children, used to go down to the river and spend all day there. The river was our playground. We used to drink from it, eat our meals by it, wash ourselves by its waters. We will fight to the end and won't give up on our river." So these routine bodily experiences of playing, eating, drinking, washing involve a multisensory interaction with river waters and marked by the river's sight, touch, taste, and sound. So yes, bodily senses are sources through which the bodily memory is produced, restored, recalled, and reenacted. But even though sense and affect are felt with the lived body, individual bodies are not enough to engender sensory and affective bodily memories. They are produced and reenacted within the visceral world of encounters that involve human and non-human bodies, entities, and things. A phenomenological understanding, especially the work of Merleau-Ponty, is helpful here to understand not only affects, but also senses and sensory perception as a communication or a communion, in his words, as a coupling of our body with the things. So bodily memories mentioned above are produced and reenacted in an intimate corporeal relation with river waters. Rivers, in this sense, are not only the background of those bodily memories, they are constitutive of them. The loss of the river might not mean the loss of memories per se as mental constructs, but it would mean the loss of the immanence of the past in the present. So that is the capacity of the lived body's reenactment of the past. So when the river is gone, the reenactment of the past, of childhood memories and experiences would not be possible. The river, in this sense, is the materialization of the past. The past leaks to the present with the river's flow, and it is through the sensory connection with river waters the memories of the past are retrieved. In other words, as in the case of Ayten and Shirin, embodied experiences of river waters in the present retrieve the multisensory bodily memories, connecting the now middle-aged women to their long-gone childhoods and ancestors. The river, in this sense, guards the memories of life intact in place. The river, as the defining feature of the place, so the village, the valley, is an essential part of the cultural or family heritage that should be left to the coming generations. This is the reason why East Black Sea women repeatedly mention their children's and grandchildren's corporeal experiences with river waters, such as swimming, playing in the water, fishing, as crucial moment of heritage transfer. The place is an essential part of this relationship between body and memory. The sensory and affective encounters between human bodies and non-human entities are vital to the formation and reenactment of body memory are always emplaced. Memories are kept in bodies and places, and keeping the childhood memories, personal histories, and family community heritage are significant motivations of the so-called place-based struggles, as in the case of the East Black Sea region. In the region and many other places, protecting the place is very much integral to protecting the river, as rivers are central to the sense of place, that is, the felt qualities of a given place that make it distinctive. They are central elements of placemaking. They shape both the geography and the landscape. They configure human settlements and characterize them in many ways. Their placemaking agency extends to shaping the place world of habitual behaviors and bodily connections, everyday practices, and social material relations. Consequently, rivers are crucial for our sense of place and place-bound identities. I quote Seniye, a young and prominent anti-hydropower activist from the village of Aslandere. I quote, we don't want them to touch our rivers. From our ancestors to our children, we live here by this river, Çağlayan River. It is where we live. It is our life. No one has the right or the power to ruin my place, my nest, my homeland. Seniye, like many others in the region, equates the loss of river with the loss of her home place. Thus, the loss can be experienced not just when people are displaced because the place ceased to exist, as in the case of hydro dams, but also when the place is stripped of the qualities that makes it distinctive. The East Black Sea case demonstrates that the relationship between place, water, and identity is not limited to cosmology and belief. It is mediated by body memory, personal history, and family heritage, as they are produced and conserved by the embodied connection between human bodies and river waters within an intercorporeal, more than human life world. Like human entities, non-human entities become a part of social and experiential worlds through encounter and interaction. Like the rivers in the East Black Sea region, it is through encounter and interaction they become a central element of the life world. Non-human entities people live with. The aspect of living with is important here, as working, unwinding, celebrating, socializing, singing, crying, falling in love always involve bodily encounters and interaction with river waters in the region. Drawing on the anti-hydropower struggles, especially in the East Black Sea region, one could state that the position of non-human environmental entity within the life world of a person or a community is crucial to the formation of political agency to protect that entity. What drives the resistance in particular case is the centrality of rivers to sensory, affective, and emotional world of experience, and the making of places, histories, memories, and heritage through its everyday material and corporeal connection to human bodies and communities. It is through this connection that water surpasses its instrumental role sustaining biological life on Earth and becomes a part of social relationships. The East Black Sea case also demonstrates the potentialities of a body-centered approach to study the so-called human-environment connection, or the relationality of human and non-human life on Earth. In terms of the gender and environment debate, it is of course clear that women's material practices, experiences, and gender divisions of labor necessarily involve women's bodies. This involvement remains mainly on a very superficial level, though, which reduces bodies to being simple vehicles of work and livelihood and articulates them, I quote, theoretical, discursive, fleshless. A more profound understanding of the body in terms of its perceptive and affective capacities and its transcorporeal connection with the environment is still waiting to be developed in the field of gender and environment. The particular advantage of phenomenology, especially the work of Merleau-Ponty, for the purposes of this study is that it provides conceptual tools to explore women's concrete lived experiences and embodied subjectivities in the context of their environmental activism. Employing Merleau-Ponty's concept of the body subject analytically help us not just to maintain the necessarily embodied character of the subject, but also to analyze the ways in which consciousness, knowledge, and political agency are produced within a world of bodily encounters. We need to read Merleau-Ponty through the lens of feminist theory, especially corporeal, neo-materialist, posthumanist, and phenomenological feminisms, though, to flesh out his body subject as differently sexed, raised, aged, abled, especially and historically located, embedded within specific social, cultural, and sexual relations of power. Framing the subject both as embodied and situated is crucial to understand how women relate to their environments. This relationship is first and foremost corporeal, as women live, work, and recreate within these environments, perceiving, moving, and acting as corporeal beings. But it is not an abstract, general, or generalizable relationship. It is constructed between specific bodies of women and specific bodies of nature, be it the land in a Native American reserve in the United States, a mountaintop in Andes, a forest in India, or a river in Turkey. To understand the dynamics of women's environmental activism to protect the rivers in our case, it is essential to attend the physical, motor, sensory, and affective capacities of lived bodies and how those capacities are mediated and manifested in different ways in different spatiotemporal and sociocultural contexts. So I have a few like more theoretical kind of conclusions, but maybe I will skip them so you can read some of it on the slides and go to the questions so we can discuss more maybe in the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Özge. That was great. Really, really interesting. And we've got some emojis coming up. Rounds of applause. Do we have any questions at all?
Sorry?
I just asked people whether they have any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Özge, for such a fascinating presentation. I was the pictures of the women protesting; those were really fascinating for me, and especially what you said about rural women who have these perceptions about being very domicile, very docile. Yeah, so they're the ones who are actually framing the image of the protest. So I had a few contextual questions, really. I just wanted to understand the scenario. So, I mean, clearly the women seem to have much more of an emotional as well as an embodied connection with the water, with the rivers. But could you say a bit more about how this relates to the connection that men might have, or what was the kind of response from them? So I'm just interested in hearing if they were protesting or if they were supporting the women, or what kind of relationship they had with the water, and why is it that women have this stronger bond? Is it because they're the ones who are collecting the water, who are more in tune with it? It's more a part of their daily lives and not the men's. So if you could say something about that. And another question I had was really about again, understanding some of their energy context. So I'm not really familiar with these hydro projects, but what exactly happens if the energy is going to be supplied? So what's going to happen to the river? So because of which they're protesting, and what other sources of energy do they currently have? And would there be other alternatives that would be more acceptable or more sustainable, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So maybe I'll start from the end. Yes. So this is the small scale run of the river hydropower projects. This is this new kind of trend, not only in Turkey, you know, as far as I read, it's also like in Georgia, in the Balkans, you know, in Bosnia, in Albania, and Montenegro. I think like there are also some protests going on there. So this is like, the idea is like on paper is very ecologically friendly, as I show it on the graph, because you basically take the waters of river from a point and take it to another point with some pipes and so some pipelines, and then you know, produce energy so to in this kind of relatively small, actually, the centrals, and then release it back to its downstream. So on paper, it's like it seems like it's not really affecting even the water river ecosystem, but so in practicality, it's not really like that, and it's not. I think it's not just only in Turkey. So it's definitely a regulation issue on the one hand. But it's also, in general, even though it's kind of made in a more kind of regulated sense. So you take like most of the river's waters, so there's some dispute. So in Turkey, the legal requirement is just 10%. So you leave just the 10% of water on the riverbed. So you take most of the river's waters, like, so it's actually impossible that it doesn't affect the, you know, the fish life in there, the fish passages, or the natural life in general, the river ecosystem. But in Turkey, the situation is like, here the like number 4,000. It's not, I mean, luckily, it's not happening now, but it's about like 1,000 schemes either constructed or being constructing now or planned or so, and a lot of actually projects, hundreds of projects were stopped by local communities. So it means that it's actually sometimes even 10 projects on one river, you know, or on one stream, and the water is like nearly not touching the soil anymore. So like one project is taking and leaving it, and the other project is taking and leaving it, and so like in practice, like the river really disappears. And so it is a great thing for, especially in some regions of Turkey, like East Black Sea region, rivers are really configuring human settlements. So like all the villages are actually following the river's flow. So it's really the central element of the place, and it's like suddenly disappearing. So that's and about alternatives. So it is like there's this energy now, actually kind of crisis in Turkey. So there was like a city who remained without electricity. I don't know if you read about it, Sparta in the western Turkey, actually, not on the seaside, but like 4 days without electricity, like recently. So there's a kind of crisis because of the devaluation of Turkish lira. Electricity become like really expensive. The issues with Russia, like a lot of, like Europe also have this kind of similar issues about. But anyway, so this is a kind of huge debate. And this is the main kind of criticism to anti-hydropower struggle. So what else, you know, like it's, so you say no to this, but what should we do? So like hydropower, hydroelectric kind of power plants are clean and eco-friendly, and you're saying like no to that, even to that. So what should we do? You're saying no to nuclear. So like this is kind of a huge debate also within the environmental movement, I would say, but everywhere, I think like this is the case everywhere. So this is like kind of a disputation. So there are some parts of the movement who say that, okay, this could be maybe done in a more kind of regulated way, in a more planned way, because really like in Turkey, this environmental impact assessment, that kind of, it's a joke. It's really like, it's not really done. It's a copy paste from other projects and so like there are some people who say like maybe it can be done in a more planned way. There are some people who are against that, like altogether. There's some people who say that maybe hydro dams are even more make more sense, because like the electricity produced with this kind of tiny projects are really like kind of marginal, and you're like ruining all the river ecosystems because of that. So like there are a lot of like debates about it, but Turkey is not really using its kind of potential about sun, for example, so kind of solar energy, wind energy or so. So it's like it's this kind of huge boom with this hydropower plants, and it's partly because of this private enterprises, because they are private kind of central. So and it's you can make really profit with it, because it's relatively cheap to do it. It's like just this free gifts of nature kind of discussion, no? So, and Justice and Development Party, this AKP power were like giving this kind of licenses to their supporters, and so there's corruption involved. So there are a lot of kind of issues involved in there. Like about your first question, like it's also a very good question, and I was also puzzled with that. You know, when I first started with this research, I didn't have this kind of feminist methodology or idea in mind. So it's kind of the field forced me both to feminism and to phenomenology, in fact, because it was not possible to not identify this kind of difference in terms of narratives and framings and so on. And I have this kind of distance with more, I don't want to blame ecofeminism altogether, but like certain variants of ecofeminism, like the kind of this implying this affinity, this natural affinity between nature and woman, and so I was thinking like, well, what is really this? And yes, mostly men are also protesting. So this is a mixed movement. But women are, as I say, more, and this is, I think, the case in many places in the world, but women are like more visible, more courageous, more committed, and so. But it's a mixed movement. It's not a women's movement. And of course, like men have a connection with the rivers also. I think there are two things involved. One is like what you say, because of this gender division of labor, it is women mainly who are in touch with river waters every day because of like working in the fields. And like a lot of men actually in the region, in the East Black Sea region, either migrated to big cities to work, sometimes abroad in Germany, for example, like there are people, and sometimes they work in the town centers. But even when they are in the village, they are in the coffee house playing cards. They're not really working, in the agriculture. So it is women who are really living with it, like day-to-day basis. One is that, and the other is, so of course, men also should have, it's impossible that they do not have this kind of experiences, even from childhood, playing in water. So they should have some kind of also embodied bodily relationship with water. But I think they think that this kind of more political frames are more kind of reasonable in a way, so in quotation marks. So they want to speak with the words of the state, with the words of the scientists, so like to be kind of taken maybe more seriously, whereas women really don't care about it, and they really talk about their daily, like everyday kind of relationship with water, this is much more stronger actually, and which resonates also with the public, like more, I would say. Whenever women are mobilized, like in these protests and like talk, there are a lot of like clips also, like they talk. There were like this great clip, like in the Mediterranean region, like the peasant women were doing rap. And so like wherever this kind of like poetry and songs, and so wherever these are happening, it is like the movement really wins. So this is a very strong thing what women brought to the movement. But I think men have more kind of a stately relationship, because they're more in touch, with this kind of what I say, more kind of the public space, that the public sphere that is kind of dominated by the state. They're going to military service, they're going to town centers and cities, and so they want to adopt, I think, to this kind of more reasonable language. So that could be two main explanations, I think.
Thank you. That's really fascinating, and it kind of shows you, you know, because you were so connected to it, the women are so connected to it, so clearly they are maybe more passionate about it. But then this idea of, you know, being more rational, that's really fascinating, because I mean, in the end, obviously men are going to be impacted as well, because, you know, the household chores essentially provide for the entire family, not just the women.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, those connections, that's really interesting. Thank you.
I know a really, really kind of solid answer, I think, to those questions. We've got Gub's just asked a question, to, I guess, just expand, to get you to expand a little bit on a couple of those points. So you said that this was privatized or largely private companies. Gub's just asking, is the initiative to build these dams top down? And also, is the harvested energy said to benefit the local community, or supposed to be exported in some way? So I guess the question here is about feelings of connection to the actual project, and to what extent those projects are abstracted from people's experiences.
No, it's very external to communities. So in this sense, it is very much, you know, those of you who are familiar with the environmental justice literature, so there's this kind of trilogy. It's actually like the model of Nancy Fraser, this recognition, redistribution, and representation. So there's this kind of representation problem that which is about how these communities are not at all kind of a part of this decision-making process when it comes to this infrastructural energy projects. So this is done entirely on the state level, and so the state gives. So there's this kind of state agencies about water and energy. One is a body like that is regulating the open energy kind of market. One is a body that is regulating the water issues, hydraulic powers, and so on. So these are licenses given by state agencies. So you actually buy the usage of river waters for 49 years or 99 years in some cases. And then you come and then you claim, so I mean, like how these communities learn about these projects is most of the time when people come to, you know, like this, start building this kind of pipelines or roads or the buildings and so, or if they have this kind of what I call local activists. So this kind of people who are living in the town centers, like mostly retired teachers, or like people who have like some kind of connection with some state, like kind of bureaucratic organizations and so. Sometimes they learn about it like beforehand, and they have time to organize the community. But most of the time it's very external. So it's like as if they are not living there. And there are a lot of people are talking about that. So as if we are not there actually. So this Rob Nixon, like this famous book about this environmental violence, like he also talks about it, how it is like unimagined communities. So how as if community is not actually there. So they're not a part of the project at all. And that's why there's this kind of, I think it's a way of resistance that I frame it as a religious conception of the common. They use the word God's water. So it is, I think, very important. So God's water. So the water is not, you know, yours and me. So it's not private property, but it's not public also. So it's not the state's property also, because when it's state's property, it can sell, you know, it can privatize it. So, but it is like when it's God's, it means that it's actually no one's and everyone's. So it's a very accurate description of the common, I would say. So, and a kind of a discursive resistance to it. And yeah, they are not part of it. And some, like in some cases, some local companies are doing this. So like when the owner of the company is from that village, or from that town or so, then they kind of try to negotiate with the community. Sometimes they modify the project a little bit and so. But about the gains of the community, it's mostly like kind of clientelistic, corrupt kind of ways. So they, you give money to the Muhtar. Muhtar is the elected person of the village, like this village head. So you try to buy the village head, you sometimes use the, construction machines of some people in the town, and then you kind of, construct this kind of ties to, but it's not like doing something to the community or making the community a part of the project, or maybe discussing with them. So it's that there's no like that kind of process. And that's why the communities are really reacting to it like quite harshly, sometimes like really kind of isolating those people who are getting money from the companies. And yeah, it's quite complex. Yeah, but sometimes it works also. So it's also like a matter of balance of powers, if you can stop a project or not. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just add an example from Sweden that I think it's quite similar, or at least the thing you said about imagined communities and the non-existence of those. Because we have a indigenous land in Sweden, Sápmi, where the Sami people mainly they herd reindeer, and there was several times this has happened, that a foreign mining company wants to come in and start a mine in Sápmi, and there's a famous interview and a quote from one of these CEOs from this mining company standing in Sápmi with all these forests and mountains in the background, and being asked like, how do you consider the local people living here? And he says, what local people? Which, I mean, it was extremely criticized, of course, but I think that really puts the spot on how these local people are perceived from this company. Thank you for your answers. Great. Thank you.
Can I follow up on that? I don't know whether you wanted to respond to that, Özge.
No, yeah, you can follow up. Yeah, exactly. So it's the same kind of thing.
And I'm really kind of just following up on that line of conversation, I guess. Trying to understand this relationship between kind of the resisting women and the projects themselves. I guess first of all, there was a question here around that kind of role of memory, and whether there are any kind of counter discourses or attempts to make counter discourses around these projects, perhaps on a state level. So I'm thinking about the way that in the past, or in other contexts, you might see the attempts to mobilize or construct an understanding of memory or of the future relating to certain kinds of infrastructure, certain kinds of energy system. And I mean, it may be the case that, as you're saying, these are privatized, small-scale things, and maybe that doesn't feed into it, or that excludes them from these larger meta-narratives. And the other thing I was wondering, that if they do exist, and I can't remember now where you showed a map at the beginning, and I can't remember exactly where these projects were, but I wonder whether distance feeds into this, because the area that you seem to be showing seems to be kind of on the border effectively, and I'm not basing this on a huge amount of kind of research or anything like that, but often there's a feeling of distance from these kind of state narratives as you get further away from kind of centres of government. I'm from Devon in the UK, and definitely there is this sense that rules of law don't apply in quite the same ways at the end of the country as they do to say in London. We were in Chile a couple of years ago, and in Patagonia, there's a really concerted effort by the government to narrate kind of ideas of sovereignty, and at the edge of their borders. I'm totally speculating here. I just wondered whether any of those things.
No, it's very, very, very kind of relevant, I would say, questions. It's yeah, from your last question or remark, yes and no. I mean, it's geographically really remote. I mean, it's not just like the place on the map, but also like they're very high kind of valleys. It's difficult to go to these villages. It's kind of you feel that you're on the edge of the world or something. So there's this kind of idea of geographical remoteness, and because of that lack of infrastructure, so those people don't have like really proper roads to those plateaus that I was talking about. So they are still walking to those plateaus actually, and they are quite angry in terms of like, I mean, this is a place that with like there's this saying that the God forgot, like this. There's this kind of, it's a place, and the state never comes to here, apart from taking something from us, like not giving something to us, but taking. But on the other hand, it's also very central in the political geography of the country, because like interestingly, most of the rulers, the Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself also are from those regions now. So like this East Black Sea is kind of like is over represented in the government in that sense. So like there's this kind of interesting relationship in terms of this kind of remoteness kind of thing. And the other thing was, so you said something else also like before that. Like, what was it?
I was asking about discourses and to narrate.
Yeah. That's also very, very important question. Of course, like there are a lot of counter discourses, but as you predict, it's kind of weak in terms of like this kind of developmentalist discourse. Like this discourse that we know from India, Egypt, Turkey, also like this kind of the discourse around this mega dams. Nehru said once, like these are our temples, and so like this is this kind of like this future. Like we are making the future, we are developing, and so we are producing energy. So that kind of like more developmentalist discourse, and this idea that we are doing it for all of us. So maybe we are sacrificing something as a local community, but we are doing it for the nation. So we are part of a kind of a communal future project, whatever. So this is kind of, they're still trying to create this kind of developmental. So we need energy is development. So this kind of, but because it is exactly because it's very small scale, people know that this electricity that is used in this kind of power plants are very like really tiny. It's not kind of in a way to respond the energy need of the country, and it's for private profit. So it is like, and these private companies are guaranteed from the state that state buys their. So it is like there are a lot of this kind of commercialized, also sometimes corrupt this relationship about it. So people know about this. So there's this kind of it is difficult to construct this kind of discourse around this power plants, and I think that's why the movement is so strong. So because in the case of mega dams, that it wasn't so strong actually in Turkey. So there was these two cases, Ilısu. There were campaigns about Ilısu, but it's mostly from the Kurdish movement actually. So Abdullah Öcalan was saying something like, this is like Hiroshima and Nagasaki for us. So it's more kind of, they were understanding it as security dams. So like this interventions of Turkish state to control this Kurdish land, so further control. So there was this kind of resistance, but it wasn't a popular resistance, I would say. So it was more like a kind of on a political level. So there was this international campaign and so. And also a mega dam like in East Black Sea region. So the resistance wasn't that strong, but this kind of small scale, against the small scale hydropower, maybe you would think that it's strange, you would imagine that it could be vice versa. But so in the kind of mega dams thing, so there are some repercussions. People are given, I mean, there are a lot of problems also about that, but people are given, you know, new homes, and there are some also negotiations about money. And so there's some kind of involvement of this kind of local communities. Whereas in this kind of small scale hydropower, it is understood that so you have nothing to do with it, you know, this is the state giving the river to the private company and so on. So yeah, it's very interesting actually questions. I didn't write about it, but I think it could be really interesting to actually narrate it from a social movements perspective. So what really motivates, so what kind of like discourses and counter discourses, and yeah, interesting.
I think the comparison that I think comes to mind for me would be, rather than being kind of these mega dam projects, it would possibly be a kind of small scale wind farms, and the kind of the widespread resistance to wind farms, because you've got this similar feeling of environmental dispossession, which isn't actually necessarily resulting in material changes to people. Like it's about a form of connection. Difference in places like the UK and things like that is that there is this sustained kind of state narrative of universal benefit from, and actually more than universal benefit, this sense of imminent danger and crisis, which justifies kind of these new forms of technology, and that seems to be missing here. So I think that's really interesting. I'm hogging the question spot here. I do have another question, possibly slightly more theoretical question. But does anybody have a dying need to ask a question right now? Okay, well, raise your hands if you do have a question. Özge, I wanted to ask about this. I really, you know, my background, theoretical background, is shares some similarities with your own. I am really fascinated by this focus on phenomenology and on some of this kind of more than human literature that you're kind of drawing on here. I think there's a really interesting tension where there's on the one hand this kind of socio-technical literature that's kind of arguing for closer relationships between the human and the non-human. So how do we kind of discursive, or how do we kind of encourage forms of kinship with the non-human world? So whether that's Donna Haraway's work, whether that's work on kind of chemical kinships of Victoria Agard-Jones, or whether we're talking about Bruno Latour's work on kind of Gaia and the ways that we discursively separate the humans from the natural world. This really interestingly seems to be an instance where actually there is a form of kind of kinship here between the human and the natural world. And ironically, it actually stands in contrast to what, so those arguments around kinship, around Gaia and so on, are all pushing for an imaginary of kind of more environmentally progressive future where humanity limits its impacts on the environment. Whereas you could make the opposite argument that actually we need more hydropower because it's one of the most environmentally friendly forms of electricity production, and that actually this is a regressive form, resulting in a regressive form of environmental politics. So I think that there's this really interesting kind of straddling here of two sides of an environmental politics argument. And I guess this for me is where the heart of the politics is in your study, is or that I really want to kind of know more about, is that what's the process of negotiation here? Are there more and less legitimate forms of kind of sensory affective connections. How do you go about negotiating this? How do you go about doing this politically? Because this seems to be quite different in many ways to other forms of resistance that are talked about in the energy literature, where there is a sense of gender rights, of indigenous rights, of kind of clear forms of dispossession and exploitation that almost have a normative stance kind of put alongside them, saying that actually there is a right and a wrong here. These people are being kind of disenfranchised, they're being, you know, and in some senses, the normative argument could almost be put on, in this one, put on the hydropower schemes. And I don't know what, like, how that all this marries up, basically. And I'm really interested to hear, well, what are the politics of this? And, you know, how does this change the way that we think about kind of living in a more environmentally friendly way? And I wanted to kind of, that's not a very coherent question, but I wonder whether any of that kind of, whether you thought, well, I'm sure you have thought of some of that, but where's your stance?
Yeah, it's fascinating, Peter. I don't know if I can really respond to that sufficiently, but yeah, I see what you mean. And yeah, it's actually, there's a kind of strange affinity, but also contradiction between this kind of more STS kind of post-humanism, let's say, and more kind of this environmental anthropology, indigenous studies, kind of more like, you know, relational ontologies, and this kind of, they're actually very kind of similar in the sense of the ontology that they kind of indicate. But yeah, like yeah, I see where is the politics of it. It is, I think the thing is, I can see what you say, like it could be seen as reactive or regressive in the ways that also not just like protesting against hydropower, but also like in the way to the wish to kind of keep the place as it is, you know, like this kind of, and the memory thing is mostly about that, no, like, so this kind of keeping memories intact, keeping the place intact, keeping the river intact kind of thing. But there are like a lot of discussions like around that, like I don't know how to relatively, like how I can address them. Like one is this, the urban space is changing so quickly in Turkey, like it's kind of, maybe it can be only like compared to China or something in that sense, you know, like it is, there remains no place for memory, for, you know, kind of this kind of spatial memory. Even my hometown, I'm not coming from like a city, it's a kind of a middle town on the southwest Turkey. And I grew up there, I'm 41, you know, I'm not 80. And I go back to my hometown and I don't know which bus stop that I should, you know, go off, because it changed so quickly, like you can't recognize the streets, you know, you can't recognize, like in this kind of pace, like really kind of, how can I say, it's a very oppressive pace, I would say, in that sense. That's why I think village becomes some kind of this kind of how can I say, imaginary utopic place that is not changing, because there are a lot of also people who are migrated from those villages to cities, but still have houses, still come back for the summer, and so these villages are kind of shelters for people, and it is also geographically remote, as I say. So it is this kind of this perfect understanding of like in the middle of nowhere. So we can go back there and like, no, like this is our place. So at least we have this, you know. And so when it is attacked in this way, I think it becomes like really, how can I say, emotional in that sense, and I see what you mean, that is not maybe essential to dispossession, but it could be seen as essential in some other ways, you know, about like your place in the world, you know, and you know, your way of connecting with that world, and so in that sense, and about, you know, the normative and the political, it's a very good question. I think like it should be related really to each other. So normative without the relation to political could be also a dangerous kind of field, you know what I mean? It's like, so I think the political field is quite important here in terms of like inclusion of people. So like this representation point in environmental justice is very important. So like how those communities, you know, are included or negotiated, or so like what can they really sacrifice from themselves, what they cannot, what is essential for them, what is not. So like this should be really kind of discussed, but with them, you know, like in a discussion that includes them. And of course, it's an important issue about, you know, this renewable energy, climate change, and so, but it shouldn't be like understood as an attack, you know, as an attack to your home place, your integrity, and so. So this is also, I think, about the form, like in which it is really done. More than this essential. That's why I kind of pointed out that it's like there are some kind of groups within the movement that could accept, you know, that they say that, okay, hydropower, we're not against hydropower essentially, you know, like we're not against hydropower per se, but we're against the way that you know, it is done. So it's very kind of you know, extremely marketized, extremely like kind of this you know, 4,000 schemes. So like this kind of how can I say, this attack kind of feeling. Yeah, so, and people do not feel that it is about renewable energy, climate change, or, you know, like this community interest, or the future of the world. So it's not really discussed in this term, or even if it is tried to be discussed, you know, governments sometimes like use this kind of renewable energy kind of discourses, but it's not, it doesn't resonate really. So yeah.
Which in itself is really fascinating. I think I gave you quite a hard task there to kind of respond to that. Because I just don't know. I've got no idea.
Yeah, well, it's important. It's a very important point. It's so like, thank you for raising it, because it's something that is to think with, maybe. Yeah, like.
Yeah, and I should also say that whilst I think there's things to be valued in these arguments around kinship and so on, I think there's a danger of overplaying that as well, and presenting that as the only solution. But it's really interesting. I think you're
just one small point, and that's why actually, like, my engagement with phenomenology is also about that, because this kind of more kind of STS kind of actor and network theory kind of which I have some, I read Latour, I read John Law, and like, but the thing is, phenomenology still gives space for this kind of subjective experience. So the kind of subject doesn't, I mean, it is still situated in this kind of more than human life world, but it is not dissolved altogether, because it's like in this kind of approaches, it is very difficult to understand like who is actually experiencing that, who is talking, you know, like what you know what I mean. So it is all kind of very from above, and that's why I think it's important that, you know, this women and women's experiences and communities, and so this like a framework that gives space to you that to construct some kind of subjectivity and agency, not a like kind of from a very like subjectivist perspective. Of course, it's like partial, it's situated, you know, it's kind of corporally connected and everything, but there is like a person or a community that is experiencing what's going on. So that's, I think, an important point also.
Thanks, Özge. You've given me so much to think about here myself. I'm going to be buzzing from this for a few days now. Do we have any other questions from anyone? We are coming up to the time to say goodbye. So
thanks a lot, everyone. Yeah, it was really fun talking here. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you, Özge. It's yeah, been a really, really great talk. We've got some more hand claps. Just in terms of a kind of a little update on the talks, on the remainder of the talk, we've had to postpone next week's talk because of the strikes. So Shannon Elizabeth Bell is going to be talking to us with Christine Wabisky and Cara Daggett. No longer next week, it's going to be on the 25th of March. In 2 weeks' time, we then have our next webinar with Rehab Khalid, who had to dash off earlier, and Maze Wassem, entitled The Nexus of Gendered Practices, Energy and Space, the Nexus of Gendered Practices, Energy and Space Use, a comparison of middle-class housing in Pakistan and Jordan. And I've popped the RSVP link in the chat up the top if anybody would like to join. Needless to say, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Özge. This has been really, really interesting, and we look forward to inviting you to future talks if you can. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Brilliant. Take care, everyone. Okay.